The following video is for entertainment purposes only. The scenarios presented within have been heavily edited and are neither complete nor meant to act as or in lieu of actual flight instruction. Consult a certified flight instructor for more information.
Blue stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight. Oh, the ramparts we watched.
Is there a better way to celebrate July 4th than to fly from one end of the country to the other? This episode contains 7 flights as I do just that, from Caldwell, New Jersey to Klamath Falls, Oregon, and represents the most flying I've done in such a short period than at any other time in my 26 years of flying. It is the most epic journey of the series so far, and despite its challenges, was totally worth it.
For the land of the free and the home of the brave. You won't bring it? Yeah.
I'm John Weisswasser, pilot and drummer for Eaglemania. Follow me as I explore the practical use of general aviation while I travel the country with the world's greatest tribute to the Eagles. This is Life in the Fast Lane. This episode is about a trip out to Klamath Falls, Oregon from Caldwell, New Jersey for an Eaglemania show as part of Klamath Falls' July 4th celebration. This 2,100-mile trip was the longest trip I had ever taken in the Meridian. And while I knew that this could be done in one day, I needed the flexibility to deal with weather and fatigue. I allowed myself pretty much the entire week with the plan to leave no later than Tuesday for the Thursday evening show. There were a lot of operational considerations for a trip of this size. Given the load of people and gear that I planned to have aboard, I wanted to keep the legs to 3 hours or less, even less than that if the weather was not cooperating. This meant at least 3 fuel stops on the way out and 2 on the return. I also wanted to keep costs under control, so I looked for towered airports that had CAA fuel rates and good services. As part of this planning, I started to stake out alternative airports for each of my stops. As usual, ForeFlight is invaluable in this way. What airports I ultimately used would be determined by the weather and by the winds aloft, but I wanted to have done this research ahead of time. By Sunday, I had to make a decision as to when to leave. I didn't have to do it all in one day, and I left Wednesday as a just-in-case buffer for the show on Thursday. I started to commit to leaving on Tuesday because the long-range MAV-MOS forecasts were pretty encouraging. Whether or not I could do it all in one day was going to be a matter of fatigue and weather at the time. The good news was that all of my fuel stops had good lodging, and I was prepared to stay at any one of them. I got up at 3 a.m. on Tuesday to brief the longest flight I had ever embarked on. Based on the winds aloft at 28,000 feet, I decided on Gary, Indiana, Rapid City, South Dakota, and Boise, Idaho as fuel stops. METARs at 4 in the morning were showing all of my destinations to be VFR. Terminal forecasts for the route only had the possibility of storms later in the day for the eastern half of the route. This was a little different from what was actually occurring, which you'll see in a second. I had to front load the day anyway, and I would get as far as I could until I had to stop for weather or fatigue. The graphical forecasts for ceilings and storms were a bit more sobering. I would definitely have to keep an eye on the northern half of my route, especially around the Great Lakes region, as well as the eastern Rockies as the day wore on. This was already apparent in the NEXRAD loop, which showed activity developing in those regions, and yet it was another reason to deviate south a little bit to Gary, Indiana, rather than try to go to Milwaukee. While icing was forecast along my route, I was confident that this could be avoided by staying out of cumulus clouds above the freezing level, one of my SOPs. As far as turbulence, the same logic applied. In my mind, the success of the day depended on making it across the Rockies before the storm started kicking up later in the day. Whether or not I could make that window depended a lot on how much deviating I would have to do between Gary and Rapid City and how the winds aloft would behave. Anything more than what I had planned for, and I would have to stop in Sioux Falls for fuel, which would add a lot more time and obviously decrease the likelihood of crossing the Rockies before the storms. Worst case scenario is we ended up somewhere other than Klamath Falls and finished the flight the next day. With me on board were Ken Darcy and Chris Burke, who was subbing for Frank, and this was his first time in a general aviation airplane, and it was fun to give him a taste of what GA is all about, albeit a 12-hour introductory flight. This was a very hard episode to edit because there was so much going on as far as planning and flying. So in order to keep the length to under 30 minutes, I'm just going to include the parts of the 2 days of flying that I thought were interesting from an operational point of view. The other added difficulty that I had was a slew of technical issues with the GoPros. Everything from problems with the remote triggers to overheating and just crashing for no apparent reason. This made for a much longer day, and I've tried to piece together what I could from what I got, but you'll see some segments lacking some of the usual advantages.
Which is over in here.
I spent a lot of time watching the NEXRAD for the next leg of the trip, and over the course of the way out to Gary, things really improved for the better.
Alright, so we're at flight level 280, and at this rate, we should be in Gary in 2 hours, which is 7:12 local time, which is perfect because I filed for 7:15, 30 for Rapid City. That should work out just great. And the weather looks just great, perfect at Gary. And looking ahead, we made the right decision to go to Gary because of all of this around Milwaukee. Milwaukee would have been a little bit more of a direct route to Oregon, but this takes us out of the way by that much. It really doesn't add that much extra time. It sort of sets us up nicely for the next leg. And then just looking ahead, that's going to be the challenge. Is what happens with this stuff here. And the trend is that it's motoring down. I don't think we're going to have any problem there. That and what the headwinds are like in terms of our fuel consumption. Those are the two big questions, whether or not we can make Rapid City one shot, and then whether or not we can stay away from any of these storms.
Making it to Rapid City was key because if we didn't, it would mean an additional fuel stop, which would ultimately mean completing the trip the next day. At Gary, it was quick turn fuel and a brief reassessment of the weather, which showed a lot of improvement.
3000, clear for takeoff.
Okay, left to 290, 3000, clear for takeoff, 9 Delta Alpha.
And I was very confident that we could make it across the Rockies to Boise before the afternoon storm started kicking up.
Alright, so we're at flight level 280, and we're showing fuel over our destination of 341, which is great, but it's because our winds aloft right now are 14 knots on the nose, whereas when you look ahead at the winds aloft, forecasted winds aloft at this altitude, closer to our destination,
2347, 180, climbing 12 at 230.
they pick up to about 35 knots. So we'll see.
2192, how the ride's up at 340. Stand by, United 2347.
Still think we're going to be fine. Our bailout is to land in Falls.
High level 320, 923.
Meanwhile, as far as
34,
convection,
36, it's all the same, mostly smooth rides going well.
it's all pretty tame
Yeah,
right
we'd
now.
like to request 340 for United.
See what this does. Maybe we'll end up going around it.
192, just maintain.
3367%.
The area of storms east of Rapid City had completely dissipated by the time we got there, and before long we were on the approach in good VFR with over 300 pounds of fuel in the tanks.
Temperature 2.
Over 900 Delta Alpha, 900 miles from the final approach, fixed right tank 290, maintain 5,300, until established on the 7 approach, cleared RNAV runway for approach, Christian 32 approach.
Okay, 290, 5,300 till established, cleared city approach, 9 Delta Alpha.
Once again, quick turn fuel and a weather check. By then, There were some buildups east of the Rockies, but nothing that was immediately problematic. Flat, hot, and it smelled like wildflowers. And now for the bigger challenge of that day, crossing the Rockies. We watched as the convective activity worsened and started coming up with some strategies for getting around the buildups.
2835, guys, 5814 grenade.
Alright, so the plan will be here. Looks like there's a nice opening.
That's just getting bigger and bigger. We just had a
Yeah, right. Did you see? Like, it just updated.
Right. Exactly.
It's amazing, right?
Yep.
How quickly this stuff builds. See how NEXRAD is a total trap.
It's to believe how fast that cloud is growing.
Right.
It's doubled in size.
The problem is like, let's say we were in a layer. Let's say there was a layer of moisture and you couldn't see.
Couldn't see it.
You were just going by the NEXRAD and be like, oh, it's green, I can fly through it.
And then when you get there, it's
forget it.
It's an anvil top.
376 is out of 7.5 or 1.
These are mostly high-altitude buildups that weren't really painting much on the NEXRAD or the radar. But given their altitude, I really didn't want to mess with them, so we weaved around them all, and you can get a better sense of all that on our flight-aware track. Then it was another uneventful approach and landing, this time into Boise, Idaho for fuel. At this point, I was tired, but nothing coffee couldn't cure, and I was confident we were going to complete the trip in one day.
Right on Delta, 9 Delta Alpha.
There was a 737 a couple miles behind us, so he had me use the first high-speed taxiway. There's nothing like a turboprop to stop on a dime, although I hate getting taxi instructions while I'm on the rollout.
Meridian 9 Delta Alpha, thanks for the help. Cross runway 2 right and contact ground.
Okay, cross 28 right and over to ground 9 Delta Alpha.
Welcome to Boise, Idaho.
At this point, my main concern was making sure that we could get hotel reservations in Klamath Falls for the night. We had them for the rest of the trip, but I hadn't made them for Tuesday night because I didn't know where we were going to end up. So I let Ken take care of that while I dealt with fuel and weather.
Clear for takeoff, 28 left, 9 Delta Alpha. Seattle Center, Meridian 929 Delta Alpha's flight level 280, smooth ride.
929 Delta Alpha, Seattle Center, good afternoon, stay that way.
Seattle Center. I never thought in my life I would ever be talking to Seattle Center.
9 Delta Alpha, Klamath Falls, 12 o'clock and 10 miles. Do you have insight?
Yeah, we have it in sight for 9 Delta Alpha.
9 Delta Alpha, cleared visual approach Klamath Falls Airport.
Cleared for the visual, 9 Delta Alpha. Kingsley Tower, Meridian 929 Delta Alpha's with you on a visual for 32.
Meridian 929 Delta Alpha, Kingsley Tower, roger. The wind's 250 at 9er, gust 18 now. Would you like it straight in runway 25?
That would be great for 9 Delta Alpha.
Okay, let's do that. You're not in sight yet, but runway 25, check pulse down. Wind 250 at 9er, gust 18, you're clear to land.
Okay, 9 Delta Alpha, clear to land 25.
Minimums.
And with that concluded the longest single day of flying I've had in 26 years of flying, and to say that I was tired was a complete understatement. The ramp greeted us with an active squadron of F-18s, which was cool, as well as our rental car, which we used to go straight to the hotel to get something to eat and to sleep. Crater Lake, just north of Klamath Falls, is somewhere I've always wanted to visit, and since we made the trip in one day, we had all of Wednesday off. So Chris, Ken, and I got in the car and enjoyed the scenic 45-minute drive to get there.
Wow.
Just in there. Just in that door.
Coming from the East Coast, it was weird to be in the presence of snow in July. The Caldera rim reaches as high as 8,000 feet, but the really amazing thing is that it's actually the deepest lake in the United States with a max depth of 2,000 feet, which is really insane when you look at it. From there, it was off to check out the venue. The rest of the band was still en route and not going to get there until late that night.
Right. Okay. Okay, and the stage will be in front.
Eaglemania has played lots of interesting venues. Huge theaters, town squares, beaches, backyards, racetracks, fairgrounds, and now we could add a rodeo arena to our list. This is Steve Rosen, our promoter, who's been an incredible host. Thank you so much for treating us so well. We've just had a blast out here. Tell me about Klamath Falls.
Klamath Falls is a nice little town in south central Oregon.
Right.
It's surrounded by beautiful mountains, including Mount Shasta, which you can see, snow-covered mountain you can see from 95 miles away.
Right. How big is it?
Klamath Falls is about 30,000 people.
Okay.
And it's mostly military and veterans.
Okay.
But we also had at one time a strong mining and logging industry.
Right.
Now it's a lot of industrial and a lot of commercial.
Wow. Okay. Tell me about the whole celebration and the concept behind. I mean, this is really your brainchild. This whole thing has been really you.
So when I got to town in September,
Yeah.
I met up with Doug Brown, who is the founder and CEO of the Klamath Freedom Foundation.
Okay.
And I said to Doug, I'd like to partner with you because I want to bring in a top-notch band and make your event even more special than it already is.
Right.
Doug's event is a week-and-a-half-long celebration of freedom in this country, and it always kicks off on the 4th of July.
Right.
So the first band that I thought of when I met with him was Eaglemania.
Oh, you're the best.
Because it made sense.
Of course.
It's Americana,
Right,
right?
right.
4th of July, veterans, military, Eaglemania, Eagles.
Awesome.
Come on. It's an easy fit.
And we're on the eve of the whole thing right now, and it's going off smoothly. And
Everything
any issues?
is no issues, nothing that
Perfect.
can't be handled, and certainly
Perfect.
nothing that everybody wants to hear about. So
Awesome.
we're all good to go.
1, 2.
Late that night, the rest of the band arrived, and we were able to have an early sound check the next day. Steve's hospitality, and quite honestly the reception we got from the whole town, was exceptional. By the end of the day, we were already talking about how soon we could be back for another show. The tour bus served as our green room.
Wow. You got your, we got 6 towels there and 6 towels here. We got another 6 towels up front where you guys would be.
show went great, and then we were treated to the obligatory yet really good Klamath Falls fireworks show, where I started to obsess about the flight back the next day. So I've been sitting here the better part of the morning, going through possibilities for tomorrow, and the convective activity. The convective activity over the course of the day looks like it might be a little challenging. And even when I look at the extended convective outlook over the course of the day on ADDS, you can see lots of stuff over the course of the day. So the question is going to be how to route. And what I'm thinking is, instead of going just straight across, possibly going up to Billings and then over to northern Wisconsin and then down. So here's what that looks like on ForeFlight. The northern deviation really didn't add that much time overall, so it was another very early morning to brief and get ahead of the weather. This time we had the disadvantage of being 3 hours behind because of the time zones. Everything west of the Midwest was reporting VFR, but Rhinelander, Wisconsin was IFR and Caldwell was marginal. The forecast was a little complicated, with Billings forecast to steadily worsen to the point of storms by late morning, and Rhinelander was expected to develop storms by mid-afternoon. Caldwell, fortunately, was forecast to improve to VFR for the day. The graphical representation of all this was consistent with what I was expecting. Storms over the plains as well as developing storms over the Ohio Valley. The ceilings and visibilities would follow suit in areas where storms were active. Icing and turbulence were unremarkable as long as I stayed out of any cumulus and convective situations. It was clear that this was going to be today's challenge, much more so than the flight out. And fortunately, the overall flight time would be shorter. The NEXRAD at 3 in the morning when I briefed all this was already active with stuff brewing east of the Rockies and a large swath of the plains southeast of Billings looking pretty nasty. So we launched in the dark. Early on, I started making changes because of the weather. I amended our destination to Dickinson, North Dakota, which was 250 miles east of Billings. Billings looked like it was going to get pummeled with storms by the time of our intended arrival.
Looking ahead at the weather, it looks like Billings. It's here. It's got all this stuff, and it's moving in that direction. In fact, we may even have to circumvent a little bit. Right. So I decided to amend our destination to Dickinson. And nice thing about that, it gets us positioned nicely to go over and in front of this stuff. This is the big mass of storms, that we really got to cross. So then we'll have enough fuel to kind of go up and above and then down. That's the plan. It would have been tempting to go to Rapid City, which is here, and then try to go through that. That's crazy. I mean, I wouldn't do that, but it's tempting. You can see how someone could be tempted to do that. I opted to stay to the north of it. It's kind of moving in this direction. To get south of it would take us down to Nashville. That just would be a really long day.
As we continued, I needed to deviate north of the storms over Billings.
And over Delta Alpha, it doesn't seem to like that fix.
I like to try to use fixes rather than heading deviations around weather when I can. Looking at map overlays, it usually is easy to find a fix that works. I guess Baxter intersection wasn't readily available to the center controller.
Juliet Uniform, Golf, Alpha, Papa, Jugap for 9 Delta Alpha, then direct.
Over Delta Alpha, clear direct Jugap, direct Dickinson.
Great, direct Jugap, direct Dickinson, 9 Delta Alpha.
We circumnavigated to the north that first big batch of storms and landed in Dickinson, North Dakota with 250 pounds of fuel under a 2,400-foot broken layer with good visibilities. With that one flight, we covered Oregon, Idaho, Montana, and into North Dakota. And while it was a little bit of a stretch, it set us up nicely for the next leg, which promised to have more challenges as far as deviations for weather. I needed the flexibility for that.
You're gonna close your...
No, I thought it'd be fun to fly with it like that. It looks cool, right?
It looks cooler that way.
Yeah, right.
That way the other planes will be like
Gull wing.
envious.
While on the ground in Dickinson, I could see activity in north central Wisconsin and Minnesota, as well as over much of Michigan and northern Ohio and Pennsylvania. While I filed for Duluth, I knew that I would change my destination depending on how things evolved while en route.
So we're just top of this large mass.
210 descending 1000 SkyWest.
And we filed for
79 Minneapolis
Duluth.
Center Grand Forks altimeter 3013.
When we get to here, I'm going to ask for direct to South Bend, Indiana.
Minneapolis
going to be our next stop.
74 to 370.
And the reason for that,
3374 Minneapolis Center, intermittent continuous flight stop. All this is way to Minneapolis.
I think. Good morning, Delta 1467.
is because of all of this stuff in Michigan here.
Delta 1467 Minneapolis Center.
That'll give us land with 300 pounds. That's plenty to play with. Minneapolis, Meridian 99 Delta Alpha request.
Meridian calling Minneapolis again.
Yep, 99 Delta Alpha would like to amend our destination to South Bend, Indiana, due to favorable headwinds.
November 9er Delta Alpha, cleared to South Bend International via direct.
Okay, cleared to South Bend via direct 9 Delta Alpha, thank you.
And in keeping with a flexible plan, that destination changed yet again shortly after that.
Well, we were originally going to go to South Bend.
Delta 454, descend via the Killer 3 arrival, runway 30 left transition, Minneapolis under 3001.
A lot of convection surrounding South Bend right here.
I'll let you know if we're going to be high on any of the parts.
So I changed our destination to Gary, which looks pretty clear right now. And at the same time, I asked for routing around this area of convection by going direct Green Bay direct.
2286.
That'll put us on the ground with 250 pounds of fuel, which should be just fine given the weather there is clear and VR. And I think we're going to have to take a break when we get there and wait out a lot of the convection that's happening over Pennsylvania and then northern Ohio. So this does not look doable at the moment.
Not to mention that I just needed a little bit of a break. So at this point, it was about 2 in the afternoon Central Time, and I was definitely feeling it. I decided to take a break at Gary, both to let me rest and coffee up a bit, but also to let some of the storms over Ohio and Pennsylvania settle down a little. When we landed, here's what it looked like. I wasn't really in the mood to try and tackle that, and fortunately Ken and Chris were really understanding. I hung out in the nap room, and after a few hours, here's what the NEXRAD looked like. By 5 p.m., it had definitely improved to the point that I could see areas that would be passable that weren't too out of the way. So we went ahead and launched. There was definitely a downward intensity trend and some good gaps in the lines of weather. Caldwell was reporting VFR, and having made this trip multiple times before, I knew that center was going to start me down early, like 200 miles out over central Pennsylvania, which is sort of a New York phenomenon. The problem with that was that it's much harder to see and avoid convection at the lower altitudes. The radar is useful for that, but given the choice between visually avoiding buildups and storms and using the radar, I'll go with using my eyes. So when I decided to launch around 5 in the afternoon, the plan was to ask ATC to let me stay up as long as possible, even if it meant taking vectors out of the way. The good news was that there were plenty of good airports beneath me that I could divert to if I felt pigeonholed.
Plan right now is to cut around the south end of this and then looking forward, I don't know, we'll have to see what this looks like when we get a little closer, but maybe we'll be able to go this way, either that or we're going to have to come around the southern end of it and then to the north of this line.
It was interesting to compare the Sirius NEXRAD with the ADS-B NEXRAD, which is clearly of less resolution. We started to enter the west side of the first batch of weather, and the tops of the clouds extended well into the flight levels. This meant that I had to rely on radar in conjunction with the NEXRAD and had to worry about ice since the outside air temperature at 27,000 feet was well below freezing.
All right, well, we're picking up a little ice, and we've gotten this deviation both in our routing and just a heading deviation. And on the radar,
Roger, I think we'll be above it.
Roger.
That's the big storm right there.
You can see a path right.
Yeah.
There's a break
Yep.
right there.
I was saying, like, you can see to the other side of it, so I think this is sort of like a stratocumulus later. I don't think this is badness, because you don't see like big columns coming up into it.
9 Delta Alpha, just looking ahead, any chance for deviation of to the right of 10 degrees?
Or 9 Delta Alpha, deviations right of course approved, direct Allentown or advise.
Okay, we'll go to the right and we'll let you know when we can go direct Allentown for 9 Delta Alpha. New York Center, Meridian 929 Delta Alpha is with you at 270. We're just deviating about 15 degrees to the right for weather, and we'll let you know when we can go direct Allentown.
November 929 Delta Alpha, New York Center, roger. And I'll have lower for you on the other side of the precipitation that I'm depicting, which is around jet 220, if you see that.
Yep, appreciate that very much. Thank you, 9 Delta Alpha.
November 929 Delta Alpha, are you able heading of 120 vectors for traffic?
Actually, 9 Delta Alpha can go direct Allentown if that helps you.
For the sake of time, I obviously condensed some of this.
We're currently maintaining 120.
November 929 Delta Alpha, roger. Turn 10 degrees right, vectors around traffic. I'll have back direct in about 30 seconds.
Okay, 10 to the right for 9 Delta Alpha.
November 929 Delta Alpha, recleared direct to Allentown, DUR.
Okay, direct Allentown, 9 Delta Alpha, thank you.
Wisconsin 3771.
Perfect.
71, thanks for your help.
Sure.
Be a little bumpy in there, but no big deal.
This looks amazing.
November 929 Delta Alpha, from your position, I'm showing an area of just moderate precipitation beginning in about 5 miles, extends for about 15 miles along your route of flight.
Okay, thank you, 9 Delta Alpha.
Just to be clear, that big anvil cloud that you see out the side is what we are avoiding, not what we are flying into. First, my forward-looking cam died, so it was harder to show some of the strategy of what we were penetrating. And not long after that, the rest of the GoPros had had enough. We made it back safely after landing in good VFR conditions. It was a long, long day and an even longer trip. I hope that this gives you a flavor of how I planned a trip like this and then executed it around a lot of different weather. The combination of the capability of the Meridian and the data available to pilots while aloft gave me such incredible flexibility when it came to options for maneuvering around some very significant storms. This was clearly the most epic trip of the season, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Until next time. Next time on Life in the Fast Lane. Set on the water in Providence, Rhode Island, is a mansion with an interesting story. But getting there for a private Eaglemania show was not as easy as it looks. It's another episode of Life in the Fast Lane.